Good morning, everybody. Welcome. How was everybody's evening? Good morning, good morning. Yes, another episode of the Virtual Breakfast Club. So excited to have everybody here. Yes, good morning. Welcome. Today we're going to talk about labeling quilts. Yes, something I do not do very well. Well, mostly because the quilts that I make usually hang on a wall and they're not really intended for anybody. But one day. All right. Good morning. So I think it's 8:30, so got about 30 seconds here and we're gonna get started. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Virtual Breakfast Club. This morning, our topic of discussion is about labeling. Labeling quilts. Good morning, Miss Crystal. Good morning, Miss Tina, Miss Betty. Welcome. So we're going to kind of discuss all different types of labels, how to do them, and things along that lines. We're also going to talk about the combi mode function that is on the Bernina sewing machines to be able to use the sewing side of your machine to create labels. So the first question we always get is, why do I need to put a label on my quilt or want to? Okay. The biggest thing is preserving the heritage of the quilt. As the quilt is passed down from generation to generation, you know, they can kind of see where it started and where it is now. Every quilt has a story, and so therefore that story should be conveyed on the label. And we are artists. So as like most artists and any artist, we sign our work. So it's important to put your signature on your work. And then quilt labels can be very simple and they can be elaborate. Okay, it just depends upon how much you want to be done with this project, ultimately. So this will kind of give you an idea of things that you can do. So what would you put on the label, or what should you put on the label? So there's lots of things that you can put on a label. Here's just a list of possible items. Not all of this information needs to go on the label. You kind of can pick and choose as to what you kind of tailor the label to, maybe who it's going to, what it's going to be used for, and things like that. But typically the most important information is who made the quilt, the date and the place of where it was done, where it was completed. To me, those are the most important information. If you made it for a particular person or a special occasion, you can add that. But for me, you know, sometimes if I do get to put a label on something, I only have time for short and sweet. So short and sweet is my name, the date, and La Plata, Maryland. And so I figure that is enough of the heritage and the story behind the quilt. So let's start with, where do we start? So this here is, take one of the quilt blocks that maybe was a sample block or maybe was extra that you didn't use in the front of the quilt, okay, and incorporate it into the label. So this image here, we have a picture of a quilt block that was a miniature version of the quilt block that was on the front of the quilt. Basic information, the title of the quilt, who did it, and the date and location. So if you've got extra pieces of fabric or extra block, these are the easiest way to kind of incorporate them into the back of our project. You can frame the label. So we're going to talk about how to make those inside portions here in a moment. But you can take a simple piece of white fabric. You can handwrite your information in there, and then use some of your leftover fabric to border it, just to give it a nice little frame. And then you can attach that to the back of your quilt. Dress it up just a little, okay, so that it's not so maybe plain and you wanted to make it a little fancy. We always have extra fabric. We might as well use it, or even leftover binding strips. That works as well. Now, when I make a label, I like to stitch and flip my label so that it finishes all the edges for me, so that I'm not having to turn every edge under like 1/4 of an inch. So I take another piece of fabric and put it right sides together with the front of the label. I sew all the way around it, and then I cut a hole in the backing fabric and then flip through that hole. And that's going to give me a nice flipped, cleaned edge all the way around. It also helps to provide a little bit of a barrier so that my backing fabric doesn't show through my white fabric that I've written on. Okay, and then you just use an invisible stitch, the same stitch that we used to go and attach our binding, to attach our label to the back of the quilt. It's completely your choice as to where on the back of the quilt you put this label. Typically we go in the bottom corners, but you could put it smack dab in the middle. It's up to you as to where you want. Now, if you want to make sure that that label doesn't get removed, okay, especially if you are making a quilt that's going to go maybe on travel, on display somewhere, and if theft happens, it's very easy to take a label off a back of quilt. Okay, a seam ripper, little pair of scissors, that label's gone. There's no identifier to who the owner of that particular quilt is. So if you want to make sure that it doesn't get removed, put it on your backing fabric before you have it quilted, and then quilt the label into the quilt. Okay, so this will help to make sure that the label stays on the quilt forever. There is no getting it off without doing damage to the quilt. Okay, I highly recommend this, especially if it is going to be a quilt that ends up traveling on a display, anything like that. This makes it a little harder for somebody else to claim that it's theirs. Okay, and no one said that label had to be square or rectangle. You can have as much fun with your label as you want. So this label here on the left, they'd probably, these are just pictures I've pulled from the internet. So the front of this quilt was a memory quilt. And so this was a leftover pocket and placket from Dad's shirt that they attached the label to. We have the triangle corner, which I'm going to talk about for you as well. And then this label here, the lemonade label, was appliqued to the back of the quilt before it was sent to the quilter, but it coordinates with the front of the quilt and that it's incorporated. So that is just, make it as fun or as unique as you want it to be. And again, put as much work into the label that you want to put into it. If you are done looking at the quilt, at least get the information on the quilt. So a couple of things about, I thought I'd give you a few tips on how to write on fabric. because that can be a challenge in itself to get yourself a smooth line to make it look like you didn't write like a kindergartner for you as well. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We have here the suggestion is it's always 100% cotton, okay? And permanent pens are going to work best on all cotton versus if you add a polyester or something to it. Adding that polyester keeps the ink from actually absorbing into the fabric, also in that aspect. You want to select a fabric color that is going to let the ink show. I would avoid white on white fabric, white on white, because if the pen passes over an area where the white print is, the white ink, the ink of the pen is not going to go into the fabric. You're going to lose that section of the word that went over the printing. You want to also make sure that you pre-wash your fabric, okay? Because the sizing that is in fabric acts like a barrier to ink as well. Purchase pens that are permanent ink and that are meant for use on fabric. Do not use a Sharpie. A Sharpie will bleed. It is not the most effective, okay? So we like a Pigma pen, a really fine point Pigma pen, which Pigmas are sold in size like 01 up to 08. Depending upon your handwriting, okay, may depend upon which size ink pen is going to work best for you, okay? The finer the point, the more delicate the line, okay? You can make the line thicker by tracing over it more than once, but that is the best. We like 05 to 08 has a tendency to be our favorites, especially if you're doing like a memory quilt or a wedding quilt, something along that line. For you, you can use that option. Now, Pigma is really great. Like I said, we carry Pigma here. I typically only carry Pigma here in the store in a black ink, but they do come in a variety of ink colors, typically red, blue, green as well. Pentel makes a gel pen for fabric. I can't find them here to carry in the store, but I have put a link to our Amazon here that I did find them on Amazon, so you can find. That's a really nice pen. I like that it feels like a pen, whereas with sometimes the Pigmas, if you don't have the right tip size, it can feel a little awkward for you. So that is nice. You obviously want to test it, okay? Typically, they ask you to wait 24 hours before you plan to wash something, that type of things. Some of them may require to be heat set. Practice on scraps, okay? Write slower than normal because you've got to let the tip of the pen pass over the weave of the fabric. And writing too fast, sometimes you can get caught in the fabric weave, and that'll mess up your handwriting. And I also highly suggest you stabilize your fabric, and we do that with freezer paper. Freezer paper is perfect because you can take the shiny side of the freezer paper, you can iron it to the wrong side of the fabric, and that will help stabilize the fabric, make it feel a little more like paper. Also helps to stabilize the fabric so it doesn't want to move on you, and the weave of the fabric stays where it belongs. And then after you're done, you just peel the freezer paper off, okay? The other thing that you can do is on the paper side of the freezer paper, you can draw yourself with a black thick marker lines. that will show through your fabric, provided you're using a light enough fabric. And then you can use those guidelines to help make sure that you don't write uphill or write downhill. And then when you pull that off, it goes away. So that is, do any of your markings, your guides, making sure that you stay within the seam allowance, and that type of thing is the best. I use that concept with freezer paper and marking guidelines specifically when I am doing like wedding quilts and things like that, because people have a tendency to want to write all the way up in the corner and then it ends up getting cut off in the seam allowance. So I like to take my freezer paper, I draw a square or a rectangle, and the sign on the table tells them to stay inside of that particular square or rectangle, so that we can ensure that their message doesn't get cut off in assembly. Okay. Now, as with some of us, maybe you don't like your handwriting, and that's fine. You can create your labels on the computer and then print it out. So you don't have to handwrite it. You can create pages of labels that are just generic, that you can fill in the blank down the road. So we use special fabric that's been treated to be able to accept ink and make it permanent. We like the EQ printables for that purpose. It doesn't require any setting agent. It doesn't require you to do a bunch of extra work. You print it, you soak it in water, and then you sew it, trim it down and sew it in. Very, very easy to do. Now, if you're like, Amy, I'm not really super excited about designing, or I don't really have anything on my computer to help design my label, there is a program in the world that's actually free, and it's called Canva. So I'm going to show you here for you to use. And so Canva is, think of it like a design workspace. I've created myself a 4x6 rectangle. I can come into Canva, I can pull in different images that I can put in here. We can add text to this, and then you can fill it in. You've got choices of different fonts that you can choose, and then you can print it. You can save it as a PDF, you can print it, you can do whatever you would like. And like I said, you want a background, you can put a background in there and create that particular label. There is a free version of Canva that doesn't give you everything. There are some things in here that you will, like specifically under text, that have this little crown next to it. And unless you have the paid version of Canva, you won't have access to that. But you actually have quite a bit of availability to be able to design, and then you can print multiple pages of this and things like that. So give that a try if you're not big in your handwriting and you want to have, or maybe you want to design something really, really personal. You can import photographs into that particular program and then crop it to a particular shape and things along that lines. So there's lots to do in Canva. At the end of this program, at the end of this presentation, and if you go to our website and pull it down, and I'll show you where to find it, I have included some links to a tutorial on how to use Canva in creating labels. Okay, so I'll show you where that is. Now, don't like to design on the computer? There are a variety of books that are available with iron-on labels. So when I was growing up, you had iron-ons, you took it out, you ironed it on fabric or you ironed it on something and then you peeled it off, iron-on transfers. And then you could easily take these iron-on transfers, you could color them in with colored pencil, crayon, you can paint it with fabric paint or fabric markers, and then have created a custom label. Okay. Now, if you hand embroider, you could easily use these and then hand embroider around that particular item to embellish it. Some of us have embroidery machines. So in our embroidery machines, we have the ability to create labels, embroider labels. OESD has a variety of designs that we can use for creating labels. So I'm going to bring it over here so that you can see. So they've got collections. They also have some individuals. Tula Pink has some labels as well. So these are just blank. You can embroider them out, stitch and flip them like I just talked about to allow the edges to get turned under, and then grab your fabric pen and write the information on the lines for you. If you want and you own software, you can easily add this information in the software for you. But again, you need to make note that, they're like 4x6 or 3x5 cards here, so your lettering is going to have to be small. And there are some limitations to lettering size. So for those of you that have taken any embroidery with me, we've talked about this many, many times. So in the embroidery software, just pay attention to the minimum and maximum size limitations so that you don't get lettering that's illegible or lettering that doesn't look pretty. Okay, so that is an option. You also have some unique options. This is printed twill tape. That is, so printed twill tape. We have woven labels that you can have made. Okay, and then just attach that. It doesn't really have any information except for the fact that it was made by you and maybe a particular year that's on it, but those are an option as well. And in the Amazon link, I linked a company that does custom twill tape as well as woven ribbon and satin ribbon, or satin labels and woven labels that could either be sewn to the quilt like the image there on the right, or you could sew it into the binding of the quilt, like a tag that's there as well. So we can also use the lettering on your sewing machine and create your own tags, okay, that we have. And then I'm going to show you, we're going to walk through learning how to use combi mode here in just a moment, okay. So on our machines, now I'm going to be specifically talking about the machines today, our current line machines, and specifically my 4, 5s, 7s, and 8s. As long as I have been a Bernina Diller, 19 years, every machine can do this, okay? Every sewing machine can do this. I suggest pulling out your owner's manual so that you can find the exact steps to do this in, because they are different depending upon the machine. But I do want to kind of show you how to create this. So on the machine, right underneath where the stitch shows, there is a plus sign. This is going to open up combi mode. When you touch that, you see that your width, your length, and your stitch preview disappears. What we're doing now is we are creating our own combination of stitches. So we would come over to the alphabet tab on the machine and you can pick your alphabet. Okay? There is an alphabet in here that probably, this big swoopy one right here, I would not use that in combi mode. That is a sideways motion font. So for my 8 series machines, don't use this one. Okay? The monogram font. But pick another one. Most of your fonts are going to have uppercase, special characters, numbers, punctuation, and lowercase letters. Okay? The line after 0 is your space. There's not a space bar. Okay? So we can create by, I've got to put on a different stitch plate. All right. So I like to use foot 20, 20C, or 20D when I am doing decorative stitches, and especially this so I can see. As we work our way through, we can just pick a letter. If you make a mistake and choose the wrong letter, you can come to the letter in the preview bar and touch and swipe right, and it will disappear. Or you can touch the I and hit the trash can. Okay. And then you can even go and add decorative stitches. Okay. So you can see that after the last 2 here, it's put in a flower. Okay. For you as well. So a lot of different things that you can do for that. So let's go to the machine, because I have it set up for us and I've created something. And I like to, my fabric is starched and I am using a piece of stabilizer. This is just a lightweight tearaway stabilizer. If you try to do this decorative stitching without any stabilizer and with a soft piece of fabric, you're going to end up with wrinkles and you're not going to be happy. I like to draw myself a line because I'm just going to follow that line on the edge of my presser foot just to help to keep me straight. I've created my design or my label here, and I'm going to start stitching. Okay. Slow stitching is the best option when you are doing any decorative stitch. So you don't want to stitch pedal to the metal. I'm going to stitch through my design here. As you sew, the machine is showing you on screen what stitch it's currently doing. When I get to the very last stitch of my design, I'm going to use my pattern end function. If I don't stop stitching, it's just going to start again at the beginning and just do like a running line of stitching, just constantly repeating the design over and over again. By choosing pattern end, when I start the last stitch, the machine is going to stop stitching as soon as it does the last stitch of that stitch or that design. Okay, so there is my design. Okay, now what you can do as well Okay, there we go. Now we have sound. Thank you, Miss Deanne. So yes, I have my label that I created. I don't know where we lost sound, so I'm going to repeat myself, so I apologize. I created it using decorative stitches at the beginning and the end. I trimmed it, okay, folded in the ends so I can get a finished end. And then we have this nice little tag. I can take my quilt project. Before I hand sew my binding down, I can figure out where I want this particular label to go. I can sew it in there, and then when I flip my binding over, my binding will finish this top seam. Will cover that raw edge. And now I just have a tag that identifies it as belonging to me, okay? It doesn't need to be, you know, for this particular item or something along that lines. It doesn't need to be overly fancy. So the same with what was just stitched there. I can trim it and then fold the end under and then create that little particular label. Okay. So that's just one option for creating that. Now we do have, and if I have a mastery video up online, I'm going to put the link here, that walks through the settings of combi mode as well. So if you do have a current 4, 5, 7, or 8 series machine, you have a video that walks you through it. For those with the original 570s, 580s, things like that, I have a tutorial linked in this presentation that kind of walks you through that as well. Now, if this is just overall too much work, and you don't want to do all that work, or maybe you made the quilt a long time ago and you're going to give it away and you're just really not feeling the love to put a label into it, you can always just write it right on the back. This is what I typically do here in the store, is I will take a quilt and right along the binding, I will write, you know, Material Girls and the date, and La Plata, Maryland, just along the binding, right above where the binding got sewn over, so that there is some sort of identifying information there, but it's not a label, especially because, you know, with the samples and things that we use, you know, at the time, I don't know who they're being given to, and then maybe the person that purchased the quilt wants to put the label or identifying information on it. So I usually will put my information just hidden into the backing fabric. And then you could also, if you're free motion quilting your own, you could also quilt your information directly into the quilt, somewhere along the lines, your name and the date, so that it is forever attached to your project. Okay. So just a little bit of a fantastic little tip that I have here for you is tuck some leftover fabric behind the label. Okay. This way, in case the quilt gets damaged or needs repair, you know the fabric where there is some fabric. Okay. And if you want to make sure that even if the label comes off, there is still information on the quilt, write the information that you want to make sure is forever attached to the quilt underneath the label. Okay? And then that way, if the label should come off or anything like that, it is still there for you. Okay? Now, these are the references that I am leaving in the presentation for you. When you click on any one of them, and I'll show you where to find them, they'll take you to. So this is the tutorial for creating the triangular label that goes into the corner of the quilt from the Sassafras Lane Quilt Design Company. So they have everything that walks you through, and then you can just hand stitch that shut. I mean, that's the perfect little pocket to slide in some extra fabric. Okay. Now, If you go to our website, you go over to Fun Stuff, you click on Breakfast Club. Here is a link to the presentation, and that's where you'll be able to pull down the information or be able to click on those links that will take you to tutorials and articles for additional information on combi mode. There is an article there on how to create a label in electric quilt for those that use EQ is there for you as well. That presentation, this Canva tutorial link will take you to that tutorial on Canva as well, and how to create labels in Canva. Do I have questions at all here this morning? I hope that was informational. There is a company called Sweetwater. They also design fabric. Sweetwater has a program, I'm going to get it here, that does personalized labels. So they have a program called Ink. Okay, it's a label club, and there are a couple of things that you can get with it. They have some labels that are not so much quilt. I mean, they're quilt labels that you can put on there and sign your name. It's not a lot of information on it, but you do have some unique things that you can incorporate it into your label. But they also have personalized label options as well in a program that they have that's called Tagged. So Tagged would give you a personalized label. These are Gina's labels that has your name printed on it, and then information depending upon the theme and things along that lines. You can also get, let me show you. So this is Sweetwater. They have personalized, like I said, personalized labels. You can get one label, the same label, a few bulk purchasing them, so it's the same label that you put on everything, and lots of options. But they do have the Tagged is a subscription program, and then you get something different every month. Spoonflower also has some yardage that you can purchase, and I linked that in the Amazon shop as well. That let me pull it up here so that you can see. So this is printed yardage that you can just cut your label out, write your information on it, and it's done. And there is different styles based upon what you want, or you can get panels with all sorts of the same label or all different labels that are on it. So that type of thing. Oh, you guys are so funny. Thank you, Miss Jennifer. I strive to be amazing. I strive. I can't say that I am. You guys are so sweet. Well, I hope that maybe this will inspire you to start labeling your quilts. If you don't label your quilts, I hope you take pictures and document your quilts that you have made over the years and things along that lines, just so that maybe you at least have that sort of history to reference. Well, I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and we thank you so much for joining me this morning. And if you have any questions at any time, please feel free to reach out, and we will see you all soon for another edition of Breakfast Club.